is Chapter 7, Methodology Procedures. And at this point, we have established your research question. You've determined your purpose, your hypothesis or research questions, and you've conducted part of your literature review. So now you're ready to determine what method of conducting the research is best to use for your project. So when looking at your research design, we're going to look at procedures, and this is the way the research is designed. And research design can be quantitative, qualitative, mixed methods, or a combination of the two. And the researcher looks for the best way to answer questions or test hypotheses with their research design. For your study, you will be doing quantitative for your project because it's the easiest, cheapest, and quickest way in the short amount of time that we have to collect your information. With quantitative research, this is used to test hypothesis and to examine cause and effect. You can also use it to test research questions, and you use it to collect the data with experiments or surveys, and then you analyze your data. And usually you analyze your statistics using some form of statistical package such as SPSS is what we use within our discipline. Next, looking at qualitative research, it focuses on the development and answering of questions. So you don't already start necessarily with all of your questions that you want. You can actually develop questions while you're doing qualitative research. And it looks at a natural setting. So your setting is not actually manipulated. So an example of a natural setting would be if you did research on people that went to church, and you went into their church on a Sunday morning and you did a focus group within the church. So they're in their natural setting of people that go to a certain church. And then also you want to use descriptives and grouping formats to answer the research questions. So within this, you want to group your questions for a certain topic together so it makes sense to the person that or the group of people that you're working with. You also want to investigate the phenomenon or the experience. Something that might be done in retail, you would look at the experience of a consumer with a product and how that experience of either purchasing a product went, their in-store experience, their customer service experience. Those are kind of some different things that you could look at. With qualitative research, you analyze data by grouping like things and placing the data in the context of the culture or the situation. An example of this would be doing a focus group where you used JCPenney, you use the men's department, and you're looking at men's pants that were bought 2 weeks ago. So you picked your certain place, your product, and your certain time and the situation for that study. And with qualitative research, you get more in-depth answers because the subjects are able to tell you whatever they want to tell you and just not the questions that you actually ask them. So they get to go in detail about what they want to talk about, which can sometimes mean that they don't always stay on topic and we'll talk about other random things. Next is mixed or combination methods. And these use both quantitative and qualitative methodology to answer a question or test a hypothesis. And it helps you to understand questions, and it will give you results that you will not expect from quantitative data. So you'll get stuff where you'll get exactly what you're asking for, but then you'll have all these open-ended questions where people can give you more information than you could get out of a quantitative study. And so you'll get more results that way. However, doing mixed methods is really great, but it does take a lot more time because you're doing pretty much two almost separate studies. Next is the research style choice. And you base your research on a research question or hypothesis, the design, or the resources available. So because of our research questions and hypothesis, we know that we will be doing more of a quantitative style of research. And we also know that we need to do something quick and easy, so we'll do a survey, which is our design, which is only done through quantitative studies. And also resources available will be another reason that we'll do something fast, because we can use Qualtrics, which can be done through the internet and provide us a quick survey and results. But an example of resources available, another example would be, say you wanted to do focus groups for your research, which is qualitative. We would not be able to do that because since we don't have access to a focus group room with one-way mirrors to be able to complete a focus group. And then you also need a moderator that knows how to do focus groups. So that would be one reason that we will not be doing qualitative, because we don't have access to all the things we would need to be able to do that. Next are the principles of research design. And research design is the plan or strategy used to conduct your research. And when looking at your working design, that is what you are planning on doing. Next is your working hypothesis, and this is what you think the results will be. And then you'll collect your data, and then you will analyze, interpret your data, and get results. Now we're going to look at some concepts to consider in methodology, and these also make good test questions. So you want to determine the best instrument and the best method of analysis to answer your research question or test your hypothesis. So to do so, these are some concepts you need to think about when deciding those. So first you want to look at ontology, which is what are you investigating? In retail, it's usually the knowledge, attitudes, and the behaviors of your customers. Would be looking at what you're investigating. So examples of that would be, what knowledge do your consumers have about a certain fiber content would be an example. What are the attitudes that your consumers have towards a certain product? Or if you're looking at behavior, you could look at purchase behavior and buying behavior and how those are affected. Next is epistemology, and this is how do we make and acquire data. So with this, it is how do we learn about consumers' attitudes. For epistemology, are we going to use interviews? Are we going to use focus groups? How are we going to go about acquiring the data we need? Next is axiology, and this is the so what factors. It says, why did you do this study? This is where you would talk about the purpose. And in retailing, we really want a why. So we need to say, how does our research improve retailing and the industry? One thing you need to try to control in your research design is the variance. And this is the difference or the relationships among variables. And variables can take on different meanings and vary. If you only survey your family, then you don't have a good representation of the population, because there's too many different generations within your family. So one way we are eliminating some of the variance in y'all studies that you're doing is to study one cohort, which is the millennials. An example, kind of looking at different generations and how they don't work well together, is what's important to your generation versus the baby boomers is very different. Right now, you're focusing a lot more on graduating, doing well in school, having fun with friends. While if you look at baby boomers, a big part of their focus in life right now is on their health and worrying about dying and just staying alive. So really, your focus in life is very different between the two generations. Next is the working design, and it's the plan or the way the data is collected and analyzed. And it helps answer the research questions and test the hypothesis. And when doing this, you choose your variables, your procedures, your controls, and your systematic plans. And within the working design, you can do a control group. So an example of controls that you could do within your study is you could have, especially with experiments, you could have a control group and an experimental group. So with your control group, they do not receive the treatment while the experimental group receives the treatment. So an example with this, say you want to test whether a certain teaching method works or not. So you would have one class that you are going to teach a certain lecture and you don't do anything related to the topic for that one. Then for the second class, which is your experimental group, that class you're going to teach using the experimental method that you want to study on the same topic, and then you test the two to see which students gained more knowledge. So did that actual experimental method of teaching work better than using no specific method of teaching? And then also in your working design, you have the process, and this includes the subjects to be studied, the site to collect the data, the length of the study, and the possible variables to investigate. So in y'all's research, the subjects to be studied will be Generation Y. The site to collect the data, it will probably mainly be people within Texas Tech University. So you would say a Northwest Texas University. The length of the study would be a 10-minute survey. And then looking at the possible variables you can investigate. An example of some variables would be attitude and purchase intentions, and how that attitude is affected for purchase intentions of a luxury brand item. So looking at design in a quantitative research study, your variables are determined, they're organized to be studied in a scientific manner, and as we've already talked about, your title needs to express the research problem. It should contain the key terms, the main concepts, and the constructs. And then once you've done that, your results will be quantified and statistically analyzed. Because with qualitative research, you're not actually able to do statistics on your results of them because there's no real numbers involved. Also, each factor or variable is independent, and each factor is controlled separately to allow the researcher to explain what is causing the action. So an example, looking at a design and qualitative study, an example would be, this would be your title, Teenagers' Use of Fads in Relation to Magazines Read and Magazine Advertising. So the variables of this study are teenager, fad clothing items in magazines, and magazine advertisements. For the study, a survey could be used to study the problems, and some questions that could be asked are, what magazines do you read? What ads do you remember in magazines, and what purchases have you made based on the ad you've seen? You could also ask, have you read 17? Did you see an ad for 7 jeans, and did you purchase a pair of 7 jeans? So this is where we're getting more specific within our questions. And in this study, each factor or variable is independent and controlled separately. So there's just a basic example of a qualitative design, which is what we are all doing. Sometimes in your studies, you'll have extraneous variables that can confuse the results of the study, and you get results you're not expecting, so you have to have internal validity. So the research study must measure what it is supposed to measure to control for external variables. So an example would be, in a focus group, a totally different topic may come up that you were not expecting and get your study off topic. But the next question that your moderator would be asking would be getting everyone back on topic. An example of controlling extraneous variables within a qualitative research study. There's 4 ways to control variance. First is randomization, and this means even chance exists across groups for their participation in the study. So an example of this that's given in your book looks at student scores on a retelling exam, in which there are 3 sections. And each student has the same teacher and they took the same test, but the students can be divided into 3 random groups, and each student has an equal chance of being placed in one of the 3 groups. Next, another way to control variance is building conditions or factors into the design as an independent variable. So building on our example that we just looked at, you could take your students that are in those 3 groups and you can look at their exam scores and add in a factor of ability level. So you could divide the students even more than the 3 groups. You could also divide them into 2 ability levels. Next is holding factors constant, and this is reducing a variable to a constant. So an example would be if the atmosphere is not the same for each of your focus groups you're doing, then you won't get the same results. So example, if you're doing a focus group in a room and it's very hot, people are going to give you short answers because they want to get done and get out of there. So it's very important to hold your factors constant from one group of subjects to another. So another way to hold a factor constant in our example of our students, in looking at an exam they take, you could only use students who score between 100 and 70. So you're trying to keep grade point average and keep their level of ability constant. And last is statistical adjustments. And this is using mathematical procedures when the data is analyzed to control the data. So really statistical adjustments, y'all will never do this. It's where you just mess with the data to get it to kind of work how you need it to work. So an example of this would be if you had a 5-point scale that you used for a question, and if everyone answered different on that question, it's going to be really hard to get a mean because you didn't have a majority of people pick one of the numbers 1 through 5. So one way to help you find a better mean is you would change that 5-point scale to a 3-point scale, and you would put question 1 and 2 together, question 3 and 4 together, and then question 5 by itself. But this is something that we would never actually do. So the first 3, randomization, building conditions, and holding factors constant, is related to your research design directly. And a researcher should use at least one of these methods to ensure internal validity. And then the 4th factor is related to manipulation of your data, which we will not be doing. So really for us, the main thing we'll just do is randomization within our study. Next, looking at design and qualitative research. This is where you put a plan is put together to begin your research, and it's going to focus around a paradigm, a model, or a perspective, and you want to collect the data in a real world setting or a natural setting, and you're going to go step by step through your plan, and that's the main thing you're going to talk about is how you did everything, so someone and go step by step through that plan, so someone else, if they want to test your plan to see if they get the same results, they'll know exactly how to do that. Looking at the working design of qualitative research, the process for it includes subjects to be studied, site to collect data, the length of the study, and the possible variables to investigate. And qualitative research uses emergent design, and this is because it may change or develop as you go along. So an example of this would be you're planning to observe how women dress on the streets of downtown Boston. However, you get to downtown Boston where you plan to observe, and there's tons of construction going on, and no people are out walking. So you may have to move your actual site to collect your data somewhere else. Next is induction or working hypothesis, and this is used in qualitative research. And most of us don't do this, so we would use the deductive model because we have preconceived notions about our research when it's quantitative. But if you were doing qualitative research, you would do in the induction model, and this is where data collection begins without any preconceived notions or hypotheses. And your working hypothesis is what you think will occur. So an example of a working hypothesis would be, I can make it to work without a jacket after I watch the weather in the morning, would be what you think will occur. And within qualitative research, there's 3 types of logs that can be used in data collection, and you use those in your observation, which is a form of qualitative research. You used mental notes, jotted notes, and full field notes. Mental notes, they are the thoughts and preconceived ideals you have before you begin the research. And it's what it would be is what you're expecting to happen within your study. Next is your jotted log, and it's written while collecting the data or shortly after. And it's how you compose your jotted notes. Is written in the methodology, and it includes what you record, how you record, and where you record. And it includes how people respond to the data collection process, the reactions of the subjects, ways those around the subjects responded, and the thoughts that occurred to you while collecting the data. Next is your full field notes, and these are the analysis of the data. And the researcher rereads the mental notes, the jotted log notes, and looks at other data collecting, including the observation notes, photographs, transcribed interviews, notes taken during an interview, or whatever other data you used. And from that, you summarize what was found. Last slide just looks at quantitative versus qualitative research, some different possibilities of different types of studies you could do. So with quantitative research, it's pretty much questionnaires that are used there, or you can do actual experiments where you're controlling certain variables. And then with qualitative research, you can do either the side of historical or ethnographic. And historical would be more like an open-ended questionnaire where you're talking with people from a historic period. You could do a literature review search or artifact analysis. Ethnographic would be more of your focus groups, your case studies, your individual interviews, photography, participation observations, and observations like you did at the beginning of the class. And this concludes Chapter 7.